In one moment, they will be subjected to a gift most humans never receive in a lifetime.
Rod Serling steps out of the darkness, cigarette in hand, voice calm yet ominous, and says, "You unlock this door with the key of imagination. You know the rest." The Twilight Zone wasn't just a TV show. It was a mirror. It showed us who we were, who we feared we were becoming, and who we were pretending not to be. But what if I told you that one of its episodes was so powerful, so unsettling, so emotionally radioactive? It was banned for over half a century, not lost in a vault, not forgotten in some clerical mishap, buried, erased from syndication, scrubbed from reruns, left off DVDs. Even die-hard Twilight Zone fans couldn't find it. For decades, the encounter was the show's dirty little secret. Too real, too raw, too dangerous to air. It wasn't pulled because it had graphic violence or offensive language. There were no monsters, no ghosts, no special effects, just two men, one attic, and a samurai sword. Yet it triggered more fear inside the network than any alien invasion or dystopian nightmare. Why? Because the encounter held up a mirror to America's deepest wound: racism, war crimes, generational trauma, and the shame we like to keep hidden. It featured a Japanese-American character confronting not just his identity, but his father's alleged betrayal during World War II. It showed a white American veteran unraveling under the weight of guilt and suppressed hatred. In 1964, this wasn't just bold, it was radioactive. CBS sponsors backed away. Viewer complaints poured in. The network didn't just ban the episode, they tried to erase it from cultural memory. For 55 years, it became TV folklore, a ghost episode, a whispered controversy, a question with no easy answers. But now, against all odds, it's back. Not remade, not reimagined, restored. And its return isn't just a curiosity for TV historians, it's a resurrection of one of television's most important moral time bombs. An episode that forces us to look at the stories we bury because they're too painful, too complex, or too honest. This isn't just about vintage TV. This is about who gets to tell history, what we censor, what we forget, and the uncomfortable truth that no matter how far we think we've come, some ghosts never stay buried. Welcome back to the Twilight Zone. This is the Twilight Zone. When the Twilight Zone first premiered on CBS in 1959, it broke every rule. No recurring cast, no linear story, no predictable comfort. Each week, a new universe, a new moral dilemma, a new quiet horror. At the heart of it all, Rod Serling, combat veteran, master storyteller, and relentless interrogator of the American soul. He didn't just host the Twilight Zone, he was its heartbeat, its backbone, and its moral compass. Serling had seen real horror. He served in World War II as a paratrooper in the Pacific, and those years left scars that never fully healed. He watched friends die in combat. He endured the psychological toll of battle. And when he returned home, he refused to write comforting fantasy. He wrote what hurt and what needed to be said. In a television landscape dominated by safe sitcoms and formulaic dramas, Serling's scripts bristled with urgency. While America basked in post-war prosperity, Serling saw the shadows creeping in: McCarthyism, racism, the atomic bomb, the rising tide of authoritarianism, and he had a question he asked over and over, like a refrain echoing across time. What kind of world are we building? He wasn't interested in aliens for the sake of aliens or time travel just for thrills. He used science fiction as a Trojan horse to smuggle in bold political commentary past the watchful eyes of nervous executives and corporate sponsors. Want to talk about racial segregation? Set the story on Mars. Want to critique fascism? Let a child with psychic powers control a town. Want to challenge American exceptionalism? Disguise it as a post-apocalyptic fable. This was Serling's genius. His scripts didn't just entertain, they pierced, but his creativity came at a cost. Serling constantly battled censors. One of his early teleplays, Noon on Doomsday, inspired by the lynching of Emmett Till, was gutted by network pressure. The victim's race was changed, the southern setting removed. The story, once a searing critique of racial violence, became a bland shadow of itself. Serling was outraged. That experience taught him a brutal lesson. If you want to say something real on TV, you have to disguise it. So he created the Twilight Zone, his sanctuary for truth disguised as fiction, a place where monsters weren't always alien. Sometimes they were neighbors, sometimes they were us. And every week, Serling stepped out of the shadow, not just as a narrator, but as a witness, to remind us that the scariest thing in the universe might be our own reflection. His solution? Wrap truth in fiction. He used aliens to talk about racism, robots to to confront authoritarianism, and time travel to dissect guilt and regrets. He got past censors by dressing reality in fantasy. For a while, it worked, until it didn't. On May 1st, 1964, CBS aired an episode called The Encounter. It would only be seen once for over 5 decades. 2 men, 1 attic, a samurai sword, and a conversation that spirals into confrontation. Neville Brand, one of Hollywood's most prolific tough guy actors, known for his grizzled face and real-life combat record, takes on the role of Fenton, a haunted World War II veteran whose attic is cluttered not just with relics, but with regrets. Opposite him is a young George Takei, years before he'd find fame aboard the USS Enterprise, delivering a performance that is quietly chilling and heartbreakingly real. Takei plays Arthur, a Japanese-American handyman looking for odd jobs. When he enters Fenton's attic, the mood is deceptively light. There's awkward small talk, forced politeness, but almost immediately, something feels off. Fenton, half drunk and emotionally adrift, picks up a samurai sword, beautiful, ancient, unmistakably looted from a fallen soldier. He runs his fingers along the blade and casually mentions he took it in the war. Not seized in battle, taken. Like a souvenir, like a prize. Then he says something strange. The sword called to him. Arthur, uneasy, stares at the weapon too long. His voice becomes clipped, robotic. He repeats Fenton's words back to him, but with an eerie, almost trance-like intensity. The camera lingers on the 2 men, locked in this unnatural rhythm of paranoia and politeness. From there, the attic becomes more than a setting. It becomes a pressure cooker. The temperature of the scene rises with every word. Every pause feels danger. The air seems thick with something unseen, rage, maybe shame, or something else. Fenton starts talking about the Japs he killed during the war. Arthur says his real name is Tara. He says his father may have been a spy. The words land like a bomb. Suddenly, the sword doesn't feel like a prop. It feels like a curse. It's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Brand's twitchy volatility and Takei's simmering stillness are like 2 flints grinding together, each strike inching closer to combustion. There are no special effects, no music to tell you how to feel. Just 2 men in an attic with generations of trauma sitting between them, and a blade waiting for blood. This isn't just a scene, it's a showdown between history and identity, and neither man is walking out clean. Then Arthur drops the bomb. His father, he claims, was a spy for Imperial Japan, helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, we're not in an attic anymore. We're in a purgatory of trauma, guilt, vengeance, and identity. The men's facades crack. Fenton is drowning in wartime shame. He may have killed a surrendering soldier. Arthur is weighed down by inherited disgrace and a ghost of a father he never understood. There were no aliens, no outer space adventures, no shocking third-act twist, just 2 men in a room, slowly circling each other, spiraling into paranoia, rage, and inherited trauma. And that, perhaps, made it far more terrifying than any science fiction could. When The Encounter aired in May 1964, it detonated quietly but forcefully. Within hours of its broadcast, CBS felt the shockwaves. Viewer complaints poured in. Some accused the episode of being racist. Others said it was un-American. Sponsors, always skittish about controversy, threatened to withdraw advertising support. And most notably, Asian American advocacy groups expressed deep outrage at what they saw as a reckless and harmful portrayal. At the center of the firestorm was one moment when Arthur, Takei, reveals that his father was a spy who helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. To the average viewer, it may have seemed like a plot twist, but to Japanese American families, it felt like a betrayal. This was 1964, just 2 decades after the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. These were innocent citizens locked away in remote camps, labeled enemy aliens by their own government. No trial, no evidence, just racial suspicion. Even by the 1960s, that historical wound had barely been acknowledged publicly. There had been no apology, no reparation. And suddenly, here was a primetime TV episode suggesting that maybe, just maybe, those suspicions weren't entirely unjustified. It was a deeply painful implication, especially coming from one of the few shows that claimed to challenge the status quo. What critics missed, however, was the ambiguity. Arthur's story wasn't presented as truth. It was wrapped in tension and doubt. Was it something his father actually did, or something he was told? Was it literal or metaphorical? A child trying to make sense of his family's humiliation? CBS didn't stick around to find out. Rather than defend the complexity of the narrative, they pulled the episode from syndication. Quietly, permanently. It was the network equivalent of throwing a shroud over a mirror they didn't want to look into. In a time when America was desperate to forget its wartime sins, the encounter refused to play along, and so it was silenced. At the time, the U.S. hadn't even apologized for the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Over 120,000 people, most U.S. citizens, had been forced into camps behind barbed wire. They had committed no crime. Their only fault was their ancestry. And now, here was a network airing a story that, on the surface, seemed to justify that racism. But that was the point people missed. The encounter wasn't scapegoating, it was indictment. Serling didn't write heroes and villains. He wrote human contradiction. Fenton wasn't a proud veteran. He was a broken man haunted by war crime. Arthur wasn't a noble victim. He was a young man poisoned by shame and confusion, wrestling with an identity passed down in whispers and scars. A sword? Maybe haunted, maybe just a metaphor, but it carried blood and blame. The episode offered no clean ending, no moral certainty, just question, dangerous question. So CBS buried it. For 55 years, the encounter vanished. It wasn't included in rerun. VHS box sets skipped it. Even hardcore fans didn't know it existed. Rumors flew. Was it destroyed, lost, or just too hot to touch? Takei rarely mentioned. After all, he had lived what the episode alluded to. As a child, he and his family were sent to an internment camp in Arkansas. He was 5. Armed guard, no charges, no trial, just barbed wire and suspicion. Decades later, Takei became a voice for justice, civil rights, LGBTQ+ rights, historical truth. But the encounter remained a wound, both personal and political. Then, in 2016, everything changed. The Sci-Fi Channel announced it would re-air the episode, uncut, for the first time since 1964. No edits, no warning, just the raw episode, placed in the lineup like it had always belonged. Reactions were immediate. Fans were stunned. Critics were torn. But nearly everyone agreed this was one of the most complex, emotionally volatile stories the series ever produced. So why does a black and white attic drama from 1964 hit harder than most modern shows? Because it's not just about the past. It's about what happens when violence goes unspoken, when trauma isn't healed, when shame gets passed down like an heirloom. Arthur and Fenton are still with us. They live in every conversation we avoid about race, war, and accountability. In recent years, anti-Asian hate has surged again in the U.S., especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Verbal abuse, assaults, elderly victims attacked in daylight. And once again, blame is laid not on policy, but on faces, on perceived difference. The attic in the encounter becomes more than a set. It becomes America's unconscious, creaking floorboard, hidden weapon, conversations we refuse to have until they explode. Even today, we struggle with the same question the episode posed. Who gets to tell the story? Because Serling understood something we still forget. Trauma doesn't expire. Shame doesn't vanish. If we don't face it, it festers. The encounter was the most infamous banned episode, but it wasn't alone. 5 episodes in total were left out of original syndication package. Miniature. A lonely man falls in love with a living dollhouse. Pulled due to a copyright battle. Not offensive, just complicated. A short drink from a certain fountain. A man drinks a youth serum and regresses to childhood. Some claimed it resembled another writer's unpublished work. Gone. Sounds and silences. A man obsessed with noise slowly goes mad. A former Navy man sued, claiming it mirrored his life. An occurrence at Owl Creek, a French short film CBS aired as a Twilight Zone episode. No dialogue, no narration, just a haunting escape from a hanging that never really happened. One broadcast, then gone due to licensing. None of these episodes were pulled for profanity or scandal. They were pulled because they made people uncomfortable. That's what the Twilight Zone did best, and that's why networks were scared of it. Rod Serling once joked that his job was the art of self-censorship, but it wasn't really a joke. He'd seen his earlier work gutted by sponsors and networks. Scripts about racism and justice turned into watered-down melodrama. Victims rewritten, villains erased. That's why he created the Twilight Zone as a loophole. He could say what he wanted, as long as it came from the mouth of an alien or was set on a different planet. But even that wasn't always enough. Serling didn't write to comfort. He wrote to confront. He wanted you to feel uneasy, to ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if I've inherited a lie? What if the real danger isn't out there, but in here? In 2019, acclaimed filmmaker Jordan Peele, known for Get Out and Us, revived the Twilight Zone for a new generation on CBS All Access. As host and executive producer, Peele stepped into Serling's shadow with reverence and urgency, blending social commentary with eerie, modern-day parable. Episodes tackled everything from police brutality to surveillance capitalism to racial profiling, with speculative twists that echoed Serling's moral complexity. Some episodes resonated deeply, others stumbled, but the attempt mattered. It proved that the Twilight Zone wasn't a relic. It was a framework, still flexible, still fierce, and it didn't end there. In 2025, the Twilight Zone is entering yet another evolution. A new comic book series written by Dan Waters is set to launch through IDW Publishing. Promising original stories with the soul of Serling, it will explore themes like AI ethics, climate anxiety, and identity in the digital age, all through that familiar lens of distorted reality and haunting introspection. Even more ambitious, a feature-length Twilight Zone film is currently in development, with actor and director Ben Stiller attached. The film follows a fighter pilot who leaps forward in time by 125 years, a premise soaked in classic Zone tension, dislocation, disillusionment, and the haunting question of whether progress actually means improvement. In a world saturated with noise, reboots, and endless franchises, the Twilight Zone endures because it still dares to whisper the one thing we avoid. What if you're the problem? It's not nostalgia, it's necessity. Because Serling's Twilight Dimension was never just fiction. It was always a warning, and it still is. We need stories that don't wrap up neatly, that make us uncomfortable, that force us to reckon with things buried in our national ad. The Encounter is no longer just a controversial episode. It's a case study in censorship, in memory, in what happens when we refuse to deal with guilt. The attic is still full, the sword is still there, and the questions Serling asked still echo. You've just watched a story that was banned for 55 years, not because it was obscene, but because it was true. The Twilight Zone wasn't ahead of its time. It was right on time. We just weren't ready for it. Maybe we still aren't. So the next time you hear that eerie theme music and Rod Serling's voice fades in from the shadows, remember, this isn't just science fiction. It's a warning, and you've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.